Hello, everybody, and welcome to this new edition of Anti-Corruption in Progress, the podcast of the BridgeGap Horizon project. Today, we are going to discuss about a situation that we encountered in our research. We have become aware recently, last fall, when documenting transparency across Europe for our T-index that we do every year. We discovered for the first time that the presumption that transparency will just keep progressing with digitalization of government is actually unfounded. We found evidence that we have more red areas in Europe than we had before, that we have more intermediate areas where transparency still exists, but it is shrinking. And the most problematic areas seem to be the company ownership. We all know that there has been a big advance in beneficial ownership registers piloted from the global level, from the World Bank, from the European Commission, by money laundering regulation, whatever. But what we discover now is that part of a setback that the European Court of Justice inflicted on money laundering regulation in 2022 is now hurting other areas of company ownership. That the decision of the court, in fact, that privacy is infringed by the mandatory publication of ownership data is interpreted by some countries not only for beneficial ownership, in other words, for ownership which used to be hidden in offshores, but for all ownerships. And countries which used to have company ownership online and free of access are now considering or already closing these parts of Register of Commerce, which of course is a major issue for the media, for investigative journalists, for civil society watchdogs, and for us academics who do our own oversight and monitoring. In a secondary but not less important area, an area in which European Union and Europe in general was doing worse than on company ownership, the area of financial disclosures for officials, where only 11 countries in Europe had full financial disclosures accessible online. The champion of the group who inspired other countries like Moldova or Ukraine, Romania has a ruling by Constitutional Court which now makes secret the financial disclosures by officials, which had been actually the backbone of Romanian anti-corruption for the past 15 years. And their absence is going to be a significant step back. The data on ownership and the data on financial disclosure and all transparency data you discover on our project website, corruptiondata.eu, under transparency indicators. You will discover not only a survey of all the countries, but also the links to the web pages where the web pages exist. Now, I'm going to go on and ask the great panel that we have today, guests of BridgeGap, to whom we greatly thank for joining us, to introduce themselves and explain a little bit how they use this open data in terms of company ownership, because I think all our guests are dealing with company ownership. And I would like to start with our investigative journalists at OCCRP and OpenSanctions. Please, floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here and also to see some familiar faces. My name is Amra Zlatarevic. I'm the Research and Data Operations Manager at OCCRP. Probably many of you are aware that OCCRP is one of the largest networks of investigative journalists, and we work on investigations across the board. We have numerous member centers which basically cover reporting through the entire globe. And our main emphasis on how we use this data is basically to uncover crime and corruption, money laundering, and illicit finance, which occurs on every level in every single country. Basically, how we use this data is by analyzing if it's publicly available, trying to do the follow the money approach, where we are actually connecting different actors and following the money leads to figure out who is actually behind a company, ultimately understanding who is the beneficial owner of a company. as many of you are experiencing the same problem, we do see this shift where privacy is considered something more as a problem for investigative journalists, because information behind who the UBO of companies across many registries is not really available for us. There are certain challenges that we are facing day to day. So my biggest hope from this panel discussion or this roundtable discussion is to actually maybe come to some mutual conclusions of how we can support each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So not only leaks exist, but leaks have to be followed by investigative journalists. Leaks have to be followed and investigated. And for this, you need public data to be available. Friedrich from OpenSanctions, very famous Friedrich Lindenberg. Go ahead.
Wow. Well, so OpenSanctions is a platform that collects what I would hope is sort of the core information of the anti-corruption world online in an accessible and clean manner. So our whole idea is, let's collect everything that is available from a public source about sanctioned individuals, about those who are politically exposed, and about other entities that have been, for example, subjects to regulatory actions. And we bring that together into sort of a cohesive data set that is used by investigators, but also by the financial services industry themselves in order to kind of understand their exposure to risk. For us, obviously, we're sort of trying to document the known knowns of the industry. We're not going into the leaked areas. We're not going into the data sets that might have a tricky provenance. We're only trying to find stuff that exists online at some other place, and seeing how far we get with that. And when we started, obviously, the idea was we'd get pretty far because the European Union was opening up beneficial ownership registers, and so we could just link up sanctioned entities to beneficial ownership records across the European Union, and finally the country of Cyprus would make sense. The problem with that, of course, is that it's not just a thing that we want to do from an investigative standpoint, it's also a legal requirement, right? So both the United States, the UK, and also the European Union have legal requirements that you have to screen what's called beyond the list, right? So EU sanctions apply not just to those entities that are actually named on the watch list, but also to those who are majority owned or controlled. You can have like lawyers debate that for long times, owned or controlled by sanctioned entities, right? So there's a very large part of the European sanctions regime that's just left as an exercise to the reader. And the lack of availability of beneficial ownership data is making it basically impossible for the European financial sector to kind of fulfill that exercise without relying on, frankly, American data companies to do it for them. So we're kind of trying to find out what can still be seen in the public sphere and where is the information just no longer available. Adina, you muted?
Thank you very much. So we had two investigative journalists who are actually providing commons that everybody uses for this information. Let's move to people who are actually into data providing. Organizations such as North Data or YouControl, who also create commons that we as academics exploit quite a lot. So Maike and Nataliia, please explain what your organizations do, where can we find your data, and how do you normally operate, not under conditions of stress as we're discussing, but why do you normally need this data and what do you do with it?
Yeah, I can start. So my name is Maike Schlumbohm. I'm the Director, Product Management and Professional Services at North Data. North Data is based in Germany, up in the north, in Hamburg. And it's a data-driven platform that collects links and makes data from official registers accessible. Currently, we cover 23 countries and more than 150 sources. So actually, our goal is to make company data, especially ownership data, accessible for journalists. We also offer free accounts for journalists, for business owners, researchers, basically everybody. And transparency is key for us. That's why we have kind of a freemium model, so we show a lot of data already in front of the paywall. Yeah, to say it simply, so actually what we do is we collect publicly available information from official jurisdictions. We technically process the data, we structure the data, and then we connect the dots. So we want to help our users to understand quickly who owns the company, how companies are interconnected with each other, and also to determine risks that might appear in corporate ownership chains. And maybe you have already seen our networks, and I would like to quickly give an overview why connecting the dots is so important. So I just want to ask you two questions. One question is, who do you think is a person with the most networks in Germany? So with the most active companies connected? And how many are that? Maybe you think it's only 100, but in fact, there are persons in our database that have more than 1,000 network connections. And this woman that I have in mind is based in southern part of Germany and has more than 6,400 connections. This first sounds suspicious, but in this case, it's a company that builds shelf companies, and then they're sold ready to make business. And another question, and the last question, then we stop talking. But I think it's very important to understand why it's really important to get a complex view of a network is. What do you think is the highest number of companies that's located in one building in Germany? So here again, so it's a building in Bremen, and if you look at Google Maps, it's very small, but actually there are more than 1,500 companies in there, and then you have to dig deeper, and then you see, okay, is it suspicious? In this case, there are project-based company buildings. Or company registrations, so everything is fine. But actually, this is what we are doing. We are trying to connect sources, official sources, and connect the information. And of course, we also recently recognized the shutdown of ownership registers, and this is something that we are very happy that we can exchange how we can go forward in this matter.
Thank you very much. Nataliia from YouControl, which is also a partner organization in the project BridgeGap, and who produce these web pages where you can track companies or individuals. Nataliia, please.
Thank you, Alina. Dear colleagues, very welcome. I'm Nataliia. I'm head of Open Data Association, and also I'm responsible for YouControl World companies. We already receive more and gather more than 83 countries worldwide, and we help to analyze counterparties worldwide. We help to understand potential corruption risk, potential frauds, potential influence from blacklisted countries. So how we work with data? We are already 12 years old company. So we help government, civil society organizations, journalists, business, banks, defense sector to understand with whom they are working with, whether they have some dangerous connections or maybe they have trouble. And now, because we are from Ukraine and because Ukraine in war, I will share today our experience, how to be protected, like how to secure information, and at the same time how to proceed the level of transparency, accountability. Why it's very important now for Ukraine? Because as transparency we as a country would be, as transparency our public funds would be, as more trust we will receive to our international partners, to also from our civil society. So today we will share our experience in Ukraine, how we managed to make transparency and at the same time secretly data. And my goal today to share our experience and also to consult with you, to have recommendation from you, how to reopen information of beneficial ownership, why it's matter for other European countries in regards of national security. So now today I want to ask the question to all of us and to think about us. Beneficial ownership, transparency would help to make national security to our country. So let's have this proper discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nataliia. This seems very obvious to us present here, but it's not always intuitive to governments, right? Governments imagine that it's just law enforcement which ensures securities, and they say, okay, the relevant authorities have the relevant information. Why do we need to share it with everybody? Plus, in everybody, there are also bad guys who exist out there. Now the world is more aware than ever that there are around, troll, hackers, whoever you want, name it. And I think that they think less of us and they think more of them. So it's not that, there are European governments, I hope, who are against transparency, but people, they just don't perceive what is going on and what they're losing by shutting down this data. We were joined by our fifth speaker in the meanwhile. I want to welcome Margot from Transparency International UK chapter. This chapter was historically famously associated with the Transparency Defense Index, which is a separate index, and in whose methodology I was involved ages ago. And I was impressed that it took off because defense is traditionally such a non-transparent area. And since, however, this index managed to convince a few countries and to get some data, and it's really very interesting to know what will happen now, okay, when data, when it's not on defense, it's becoming less and less accessible. So Margot, we are first round, we are just introducing ourselves and explaining how do we deal with company data or with other kind of open data in our daily lives as organizations.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry that I had a number of tech issues, but I'm here now and under the correct name. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so as Alina mentioned, I work at Transparency International UK, and we use kind of corporate data, beneficial ownership data all the time as part of our investigations. Our mission is to kind of expose the flow of illicit finance and the role that kind of the UK and London plays in facilitating illicit finance from around the world. And actually my contributions today, I'm really hoping to kind of also talk a little bit about the kind of effect that the CJEU court ruling has had on EU registers, but also beyond. As Transparency International UK, we're kind of looking a lot at overseas territories and crown dependencies, and we're seeing that the ruling in the EU has had kind of effects there, and they're kind of talking about following suit, or indeed already have. And then in terms of like how we use the data, I mean, we kind of use it similarly to investigative journalists in many ways. So like we kind of track and trace individuals linked to kind of kleptocratic or corrupt regimes that have used shell companies to hide their ownership. And in total, we published a story in 2018 where we found £250 billion worth of money that had been stolen from almost 80 states, and that had been funneled through companies registered in the overseas territory. So just to illustrate the scale of that. And then the kind of second big bit that we do, and that's maybe where we're kind of more civil society hat on, is that we use open and accessible data to do macro analysis. And so we've been able to identify kind of transparency loopholes or kind of weaknesses and vulnerabilities in existing types of structures. So for example, limited partnerships or Scottish limited partnerships here in the UK. And that's then informed direct policy from the UK government. So that's kind of how we use the data on the day-to-day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's start being concrete, all right? I started by saying that we notice something goes on due to our T index, which is a very blunt instrument in which we agree, we give a full point if all the information should be on a register of commerce, including ownership, free of charge, because in our general anti-corruption theory, a Bellingcat or a whistleblower or somebody with the relevant information can be somebody who may not afford to pay a register of commerce to get this information. So you have everything, and for free you get a point. You don't have anything, you get a zero. And in between, there is, in this rather blunt trichotomous instrument, a 0.5 if you miss certain information. And what did we notice is that although only 2 countries are completely in the red in Europe, which are Cyprus and Luxembourg, if you look what happened T-index of 2 years ago versus the T-index now, a lot of companies are moving from green into the orange area, which is actually less good. So you do find some information, but ownership information, it's increasingly restricted. And we also heard in debates in various countries that more countries are prepared to restrict it. So I would like to start with Amra actually and ask concretely, where did you notice that transparency is shrinking? What are the areas where you have more difficult access than you had 2 years ago?
Thank you, Alina, so much. So basically to add, when we are discussing UBO information and its availability for the stories which OCCRP is publishing, it's not the only information on which we focus in order for our story and a project to be published. So additionally to this, we have to look into customs data, we have to look at asset declaration, we have to look at real estate and cadastre information, there's public procurement records, and we're also looking into court documents. So a lot of time, this information, even if it's published, is quite unstructured. It's very hard to read, and probably for somebody who is not coming from this background of investigative journalism, obtaining that information will be difficult for them to find leads. What we kind of find useful for us is, probably people on this call are familiar, is the tool which we use called Aleph Pro. It's basically an investigative tool which follows the follow the money module, where we do take this publicly available information, which is pretty much unstructured. We create it into something which is searchable and structured, and then we can kind of cross-reference this information with rest of data sets which we have in Aleph. Sometimes these data sets are other publicly available data sets, but sometimes it could be leaks. And that kind of gives us the leads for information that we need. The biggest problem we do definitely notice is, in fact, that the problem of UBO registries themselves. Friedrich mentioned Cyprus. I actually do remember a time a couple of years ago where UBO records from Cyprus were actually available. And on the research and data desk, it was available for us to kind of obtain it for a particular fee. But we are currently facing a situation where it's not possible at all. And there are a couple of registries around the world where we actually collaborated with Transparency International to actually see the availability of the information for journalists, to see what is the process and procedure, because journalists are considered to be individuals who have interest in such information based on the background and the work that we are doing. And I wanted to mention a couple of them which we were actually shocked in terms of information and what we got as a response from the registries themselves. So with Cyprus in general, the UBO application was completely refused. So even with the justification that this is for the public interest, we were not able to obtain information. What we also found interesting is that in Ireland and Germany, it's a bit opposite, but they're asking us to provide them information of why we need the UBO of a particular company, which additionally poses like a risk to our entire investigation and people who are we investigating in. Also, what I noticed, what was interesting about Ireland, is that they actually asked us to provide proof that the company that which we are looking for is already convicted of money laundering, crime, and corruption, which is additional block to that. Next to other issues which we at OCCRP face is that many of the registries which actually came into this process of making the UBO information a bit more public are asking for European Union identification card. This immediately poses a problem for all the people who are not European Union citizens, and it blocks their ability to search and to find information which is crucial to prove their stories. This additionally poses a question of to what extent is publicly available information good enough for the stories and projects on which we work as investigative journalism versus leaks. That kind of does seem that leaks are overtaking and are becoming more a priority for the world of investigative journalists, and that could probably be the end result if we see that there is a lack of transparency for the UBO registries and other registries which should be publicly available for investigative journalists.
Thank you very much. We have an additional speaker from Open Government Partnership, who also I think will be able to give an overall view of the situation. Welcome, Anastasiya, and also feel free to tell us a little bit how is Open Government Partnership, in which so many of us had very high hopes, performing presently, because another problem of transparency, of course, is the retirement of financial support from transparency organization, which I think affects many people in this virtual room of ours. So, Anastasiya,
Thank you, Alina. Thank you. Hello, dear colleagues. So I work at Open Government Partnership. We have 74 countries that are members of Open Government Partnership. We have 150 local governments. And the main idea of the organization is for the government, in a wide sense, executive level, parliaments, local level, judiciary, to cooperate with the civil society organizations and citizens. And in the area of beneficial ownership, transparency, of course, we encourage all the countries we work at for the governments to make the commitments on depending where they are on their way to transparency or verification or compliance with the registers, to have the interoperability of the registers included in the procurement and so on and so forth. So basically, having these 74 countries, having the connections with the governments themselves and civil society, we encourage the ambitious commitments. We recognize these commitments at international fora. Some governments like to be recognized when they do the correct thing. We also encourage peer learning. So if Ukraine was the first one and advanced, we connect them with Armenia or Moldova, and to have this running. We also connect international organizations such as Open Ownership, who work on this topic, with the countries to support the drafting of the commitments on beneficial ownership, for example. And we have an independent reporting mechanism, so-called. So when the governments commit to reforms on beneficial ownership, it independently assesses how ambitious the commitment is. It can suggest how the commitment can be transformed to be more efficient, and also monitors the result of the commitments. And the commitments are usually made for 2 years. Some countries make them for 4 years. So basically it's ongoing. And we have several countries, including Ukraine, including Australia, for example, who make the BO connected commitments in several action plans. So basically from the start of the opening the registry and to advancement in this area. Of course, we work with the civil society. They can monitor how the commitments are implemented. And we used to work in Ukraine with YouControl, who you heard before, to see how to suggest together with the government how the verification could be done for the BO information. And basically, this is what we encourage from other countries. So in very, very short, of course, we help governments make the commitments, implement, monitor, strengthen their UBO commitments, and connect them with broader anti-corruption movement or international partners who can assess them with that. Alina also asked about how OGP is doing in general. You could have seen that we have some new countries that are joining. We have the US, for example, who left the Open Government Partnership, but of course not only us. In terms of finances, of course, as many other transparency pushing organizations after the USAID left, it was harder. Now we plan to continue working as we are, and we try to support the countries and CSOs with whom we work as much as we can. I work more closely with Ukraine and Moldova, and also in our team we work closely with Armenia, the civil society of Georgia. So we have a special project that is supported by the European Commission, where we can give special attention to the formerly called Eastern Partnership region. And we try to also fundraise to have this in other countries as well.
Thank you so much. Well, time spent in fundraising is less time spent in anti-corruption, but we cannot do without it. I've noticed that, and you can also see on Corruption Data EU when you display various transparency maps on various items, that post-communist Europe is actually doing quite well, surprisingly well. But because our countries had problems, people invested more in transparency, while we have some countries with good control of corruption in Western Europe, but which are doing poorly on transparency. And this difference across countries, we're using benchmarking in order to encourage countries which are lagging to catch up with the front runners. But what I'm afraid in the current context is that, in fact, it acts differently. In Romania, the argument was made that why should we continue to have financial disclosures after so many years, when politicians paid a very heavy price for them, when in Western Europe people don't have them, and they don't look like they are going to adopt them. No, they imposed it on us. The argument runs, nobody imposed it on us. I mean, we wanted them and advocated for them, but this is what politicians would say. They imposed it on us, and now you see that in Western countries there is total impunity. So I'm afraid that the difference is from now on going to play to the bottom. And people are going to say, okay, these people secured information, let's secure it too, in order to avoid the lawsuits or potential other problems. Okay, let me turn back to the investigative journalist. So, Friedrich, do you feel a negative trend? Do you feel that the space is, our operating space is different than a year or two ago?
Yes, I think so. I think we're seeing both a failure of the EU in particular to sort of enforce or build a working sanctions regime. And we're seeing a failure of the EU to build essentially digital sovereignty, right? And I think kind of for the failure of the EU sanctions regime, right, like I feel there's a simplified notion of it where like Vladimir Putin goes to revolut.com and tries to sign up and that doesn't work. That's not what we're really trying to do, right? What we're trying to do is to disentangle supply chains. We're trying to disconnect European high-tech manufacturers and suppliers from Russian and Iranian, or whatever the war of the week is, arms manufacturers and industrial concerns, right? And for that to work, we need to kind of look at a more complex economic picture than just here's a list of 5,000 things you should do business with. And I think kind of what I feel we've really observed is even now, when we have people who are implementing sanction screening programs and they talk to us, the Americans, they know about OFAC 50. They understand that they need to look at subsidiaries and that they need to analyze ownership chains. And they're trying to figure out how to do that. And that is because OFAC has been quite effective, right? Even in like whatever post-America is now, it's still more effective than what the EU is doing, in that it has this requirement of OFAC 50, but then it also has like really effective enforcement mechanisms put in place by OFAC, including secondary sanctions that come in. And that creates an incentive for the industry to really understand kind of these deeper economic structures, right? What we're doing in Europe is we're putting in place the same legal requirement for people to understand ownership chains, but then we're not creating the data that should be there by legal fiction, but also we're not really creating incentives around enforcement that much. And so we don't get asked by Europeans how to do ownership analysis, only by Americans, right? So there's like even in the perception of like, what does it mean for us to kind of enforce sanctions as a private business? There's this really marked difference, right? And I think that comes down to the question of like, do people even understand that they need to do this? Then would they be able to do, right? Like I think Amra, it described really well this question of like, whatever the rules are that we establish for accessing beneficial ownership data, do they allow us to ask the right questions, right? In order to understand what are all the companies owned by a Russian arms concern, I need to be able to ask that question. I can't just have to go for every single company and ask, is its beneficial owner a Russian arms concern, right? So the question of like, which direction can I ask becomes really important. The question of like, how automatically can I ask, under what conditions can I ask? All of these things are, I think, unclarified and essentially unsolved, right? And what that means is we've created sort of this legal requirement for access to beneficial ownership information, but really no good strategies for doing it in practice. So we're ending up in a place where even the German police, when they want to investigate economic crime, what they do is they go to Moody's or they go to another American data company and they buy it there. And we don't even use our own registries for our own law enforcement, right? And so I think that is also, there's like a lot of discussion for obvious reasons growing up around the question of sovereignty. That's an aspect of sovereignty, right? If we cannot investigate economic crimes in our own jurisdictions without buying a subscription from a CIA-funded data startup, what are we doing, right? That is also a problem that we need to get out of, that we need to back out of for quite obvious reasons at the moment. And so I think that's also a failure that we're seeing, is that transparency is not just, in my mind, the right way to do it, it's also the European way to do it, because we are not a place where we want to have solve this all by industry. We want to have it solved in a meaningful distribution between the public sector and the private sector, where the public sector takes a bigger piece of responsibility, and they're not doing that at the moment, and that's really a problem. And I think kind of in that world, though, there is maybe a sparkle of hope, which is like talking to these organizations. It's incredible how much they have to rely on the output of investigative journalists. I think kind of if there is one group that has a real opportunity here to prove their value, not only in a spiritual sense, but also possibly in a commercial sense, it is investigative journalists, because they're the only people who are really spending time figuring out what's going on. And maybe that's an argument for the EU investing further funds into that industry or into that community. And maybe that's an argument in general to kind of treat that as sort of the European response to how we do beneficial ownership response in practice. Yeah, I think that's where we have to go. Okay, thank you so much. I mean, two things I take out of it. One is that, as you see, we have different perspectives here. You know, I think in the civil society we're not only interested in investigation, but on the fact that everybody, any individual who's in the situation of being abused, because this is what corruption is abusing someone to grant a favor to someone else. And that person should not be an investigative journalist, can be anybody. And it is for that anonymous person, everybody potential whistleblower, because his or her interest is touched, that we need all the information open. So we have specialized users such as you, and we also have the non-specialist citizen, but he can be in the situation or company where he needs to know something because otherwise he is abused. Okay, that I think is part of the broader set of argument. And the other important point that you make is this criticism of the European Union. Being old enough and in earlier times a scholar of enlargement, I can tell you that freedom of information has never been a EU thing. It has never been part of the acquis. It has just come out through a totally different channels, from diffusion. I mean, I promoted it outside my country, in Serbia, in Croatia, in other places, diffusion, American NGOs, all this American philosophy of transparency. So we are hurt in more than one ways from the fact that United States pushes out of OGP, because it was the global champion of transparency. However, I think that it's a test of our maturity, and our meeting today proves it, and we have to manage without United States. And I'd like to move to our UK colleagues and ask a little bit what their experience is. What are the new challenges which seem to appear due to privacy law and other new obstacles to transparency? Margot?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to pick up on a couple of things that were already mentioned as well. Something about also kind of the purpose of these registers. Like, so one of the reasons why the UK, for instance, still has a publicly available register, all of that information is available on Companies House, is because the kind of purpose behind the register is much broader than simply like tackling money laundering. So I think kind of there's also a real question about looking at this as you were alluding to, Alina, like, you know, leaseholders trying to figure out who owns the property that they live in because it's held by a company, economic, like fair competition, market competition, economic well-being, anti-fraud policies. Like there's a number of reasons why users beyond those specialized users, so kind of like your average business that isn't subject to AML, or kind of even your average individual who's trying to find out who owns the property they live in that's not being maintained, might need access to those registers. And I think, you know, the UK is quite lucky that like the way that it designed its register, which was much broader in policy, and therefore it doesn't feel like it could be subject to the same kind of like challenges as we've seen in the EU. So that's just kind of something to think about as part of this conversation. Going back to your direct question, Alina, about what our experience has been. I mean, I think there's already been some mention, OCCRP mentioned, because we've kind of been partnering or working on slightly similar project here in terms of testing the register. That being said, we're doing this from a civil society point of view, and they've been kind of doing it from a journalistic point of view. But some of the patterns that we've identified include kind of friction at point of access, right? It's like, do you need a national ID? Do you need to email the registrar so that you can get a link and then access the registrar? Then it's the type of legitimate interest, right? It will be defined differently in different jurisdictions. I think it's been alluded to in Ireland, and there needs to be an ongoing like kind of case. In I think there was, is it Hungary or another country where you have to be kind of related to some of the owners or have some kind of you need to have a stake in that business in order to access information about it. So legitimate interest definitions will vary, and even when we've been looking at how this has been weaponized elsewhere outside of the EU, that's true, for example, in some jurisdictions that don't recognize the predicate offenses of money laundering. So that's a critical issue, right? If you're looking at deforestation in Indonesia and you're trying to link it back to a company registered in the Cayman Islands and they don't recognize deforestation as a predicate offense, and therefore that won't give you legitimate interest. So definition of legitimate interest, friction, then there's cost. They will all differ in terms of cost. Timelines will vary massively. There's been cases, I think, specifically in Germany, where it's been extremely long, and in other places where it's been kind of a lot more rapid. And then the type of evidence required is probably the final point. In some instances, you need to submit quite a lot of evidence as to why you have a legitimate interest, and in some cases, directly connected to the entity that you're looking at, which is where there might be some real risks for the applicants if that was to be seen, for instance, by nefarious actors. But then in other cases, all you have to do is tick a box and say, I'm looking at this, I'm going to act responsibly, and I'm going to use this data in the context of anti-money laundering purposes. So really varied responses across the board. I just want to finish on one final point, which is how this has been used and weaponized in other places. I think there's the reaction to the EU ruling has been to either de-risk or completely weaponize the ruling. And the British Virgin Islands is about to introduce a legitimate interest access register on the 1st of April. And the way that it's going to be structured is that if you apply as a journalist or a member of civil society to access this data, the beneficial owner will be tipped off, and they will get an email kind of telling them someone at Transparency International is trying to access your data, and then they get a chance to object. And the objection can be on grounds such as national security or the public interest. And then if they object, they can, pursue journalists because they might kind of or kind of try defamation, etc. They might also relocate their assets. So I think we just have to be asking ourselves a little bit, whose privacy or rather secrecy are we trying to protect, and has the kind of burden of proof, because our privacy isn't being protected, right? The kind of evidence that we're being asked to submit is actually quite extensive. So has the kind of burden been flipped a little bit? So yeah, I'll leave you with those questions.
Thank you so much. It's rather clear that the burden of proof, if you ask for a legitimate interest to access public information, has shifted and was put now on civil society and journalists, and not where it should be on the government. But what I was puzzled about in Friedrich's comments were on this reference of digital sovereignty, because as with many syntagms which circulate these days, it's by trying to be everything, it ends up by being nothing. So can we use this in our favor? I mean, can this really? I'd like to turn to Maike from North Data. How is first explain to us a little bit, how is digital sovereignty even involved into this discussion that we have on providing public information on company ownership? And why do governments think that they actually do better if they keep this information to themselves, even if actually they end up going to Moody's and pay for it, as Friedrich argued? Can we use all this context on digital sovereignty somehow to argue for transparency? Or in fact, it's just sovereignty for intelligence services and whoever has access to classified information?
Yeah, let me comment on that one. So, yeah, basically just to give you an overview about it's affecting North data. So, we also see, so as mentioned before, we cover 23 countries at North data, and we see that beneficial owner registers are shutting down recently. So, Czech Republic, Malta, and Denmark were the last that shut down. Currently, we just have UK and Poland that are open, and but in general, I want to say that in general, company data is getting more accessible. So looking, for example, at countries like Sweden or Netherlands. So we couldn't get data from those countries last year, but now they're opening the registers and we are able to make the data public. So it's one side beneficial owner registers, and generally it's I don't see that trend personally. What I think is very critical and what we have to think about is, I think public registers are very useful in terms of quality aspects. So thinking, for example, of beneficial owner registers that have been closed. So as an example, Germany, we have 2.5 million active companies in Germany. More than 1.5 companies have shareholders. So of course you have fines and all the quality measures that you read on the web pages, but how do you make sure that the quality that we get is actually good? And I think this is something we have to consider. It's better when you have the public looking at it. For example, as a good example, for example, the Glyph register. If you want to do international transactions, you have to register for a line number, and this is actually a very good register. So what we do, for example, in Germany, and this is also referring to Friedrich. So the risk is if data is not available, then third-party companies like Moody's, they come into the market and they start modeling data or estimating data, and then you get the intransparency of data because you cannot trace, is this correct or is it wrong? So what data to take? This is for me a high risk. So maybe then you will ask me, okay, and what does North data do then? We actually take the official data that's available, and this is also a contradiction. So ownership data is part of high value data set as part of the EU directive. So, I mean, how can you close beneficial owner registers when you have the EU directive that defines ownership data as part of it, as part of high value sets. So basically what North data does is we try to reconstruct ownership information based on official information. So basically in Germany, we take the information from shareholder lists. We read them out. We take BaFin information for voting rights and the LAI register. So this is actually what we are doing. And of course, I mean, we have to be clear. So who is the victim of all this? I mean, basically, mostly small companies, right? Because then not only financial sectors has to do compliance, and like Friedrich said, so I think the smaller companies, they cannot afford a Moody's or big databases. So it's at the end, it's a matter of costs, right? Because if the infrastructure is not there, from the EU, the data is not connected, you cannot do compliance properly, then the cost rise to fulfill compliance, then you have the risk that you really detect the risks due diligence becomes harder, and then smaller companies, they are disadvantaged, right? Because bigger companies, they have got the processes, they can pay for Moody's and Dun & Bradstreet, but the smaller ones not. That's why, this is something that we have to bear in mind.
Great. So a new category of people who stand to lose out of the reduction of public infrastructure of transparency, which are companies, particularly smaller size companies, not just citizens, civil society, or journalists, but companies as well. Let me move to Nataliia, because if it is a country which actually captures the paradox of having transparency, needing transparency in times of difficult security, that is Ukraine. Ukraine was on top of the world in our T index 3 years ago. And then, of course, the war restricted some of the areas from obvious reasons. You had to restrict some information in order not to be used by the enemy. Although, I'll be very honest, I think that the enemy downloaded everything long ago, and there are other areas. I really don't think that out of public information, someone evil can find something that we don't have. But still, this is really the testing ground of our transparency theories. If transparency really makes a country more resilient, and how are you dealing with this? How did you manage to first recover a significant part of what was lost at the beginning of the war? And what are the plans for the future?
Yes, thank you so much, Alina. For everybody who is now listening to us, Ukraine was the first country in Europe who opened information about beneficial ownership. And we have a huge advocacy campaign in Ukraine with Open Data Association, with non-government organization, with civil society. I see that today in our meeting, Nadia Babinska, she is the leader in the sphere of open data in Ukraine. And we were convinced, struggling with governance, to convince them why they should open information about beneficial ownership and about information about financial statement, for example, of the company. But let's step by step, I will explain the whole picture, like with which we faced and why for us it was a huge disappointing what to do after full-scale invasion. So before full-scale invasion, as you mentioned, Alina, Ukraine ranked second in Europe in the Open Data Maturity Index. Can you imagine? So we have more than 40,000 open data sets, open sources like ecology, beneficial ownership, court decision, financial statement, information about transport, like every information that you can imagine was open in Ukraine. Moreover, even you can see it in United Kingdom, in London, for example, and you can go to Ukrainian websites and see all the information. If you want to make money with Ukraine, or if you want to invest into Ukraine, you could see this information immediately without fee, without money. So it was huge reform, and we were advocating access to this reform. Moreover, thanks to open data, it was increased more than 200 digital services or official company as YouControl, for example. Around 50,000 people were working in the sphere, were employed in this ecosystem. And also, according to the investigation, thanks to open data, it's contributed up to 2% of GDP. Just think about this. So it's one of the major things when you try to talk with your governance, talk in the sphere of money, like how much money, how much economy growth they would receive if they would open data. Also, I want to tell that, and I'm sure absolutely convenient, that thanks to open data, the level of corruption, according to Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, was decreased. So the level of corruption in Ukraine was decreased dramatically. It's because of open data and access to information. So transparency is not like something abstract or something that needed only for civil society organization. By using open data information, you can make decision making, you can have a greater predictability of governance, and you make be more confidence in business and investors. But It was everything good. So we were at the top. Everything was okay. New data sets opened in Ukraine. We were happy as civil society, as business, because we have a lot of information. But when the full start invasion starts, imagine, guys, all 40,000 data sets was closed immediately at one day. One day, nothing. You can't work with your counterparties. You can't check public procurement. You know nothing about governance spending. You know nothing. And it was shock. I understand this situation about the governance when the war started. Everybody was in shock, like what to do? Should we open information or not? But Alina, as you absolutely very clear stated, as this information was opened previously, so enemy for sure downloaded all this information. So what's the reason to close this information? Like from whom you want to close? From business who tries and continue to operate in Ukraine? From civil society to close this information? From investigators? So it was a crazy decision. So that's why, despite all the possible problems to civil society activists and for business, together Nadia Babinska and our community, we started advocacy campaign. We came to governance. We start advocate why information, especially about beneficial ownership, is very important for national security. Because of war, because of Russia, you need to know with whom are you working with whom you sign a contract. Maybe inside the structure of final beneficial ownership might be Russians. So imagine Russia would receive contracts from government, or Ukrainian company will continue operate business with Russia or with Belarus. It's crazy. It's not even because of anti-money laundering prevention or FATF standards. It's because of national security. We want to have business, we want to operate, but we want to need with whom we are working. The same situation with other countries. As I was mentioned at the beginning, at the YC World, we gather information from 83 countries. And now it's very important to every countries to understand who presented in your countries, who opened business, who financed your non-government organization, who financed your political parties. Maybe they make manipulation. We uncover many investigations because we work, Veronica is here present, we work with many than 3,000 journalists and civil society organizations all over the world, and we explain why you should uncover hidden connection, why you should reveal supply chain, for example, who produce components for drones for Iran, for example, who works with China. So it's not about beneficial ownership, it's not secret information that needed like for some business, but it's needed for all of us. We need to be sure who makes business in our countries, who influence on our civil society, who influence on politicians, who bribes politicians, like who gives money to them, who stands behind some network in Germany, for example. Do you know this information? But maybe now it seems very strange, like why Ukraine told information about this, because we are in war. We know the situation from the scratch. We understand how enemy do, by how. So he pretends, for example, Russian pretends that they are reliable business from Abu Dhabi, for example, or from Switzerland. Yes, and they came and make business in your countries, and they decided to make spies, or they want to steal some technology in defense, for example, or they want to make spies of your civil society organization. Everybody from you, I believe, read a recent investigation that some Russian churches, they pretend that they make that they're local churches, but they try to convince non-government organizations so to be their like spies network. Imagine. So who financed these churches? Who controls these churches? So my main position that closing information is illusion. It's not in the favor of national security. It's in the favor of enemy. It's at the first day of full-scale invasion, Russia closed all their data sets. all information about their oligarchs, about their sanctions, about their friends of Putin, etc. What does it mean? So they wanted to close information from all the world. So that's why, unfortunately, some European countries also doing the same. They like trying to close information about their beneficial ownership, but they are not thinking about their existing businesses, and they are not thinking about national security of their employees, of their civil society organizations. So my main input to make more disclosure, to talk with governance, please invite politicians, invite governance, explain why closing information is more dangerous than ever. So the benefit in Ukraine after full-scale invasion, thanks to our advocacy campaign, now information about declaration open, financial statement of the company open, some basic information about official registers of the company, non-government organizations are open in the format of open data, some ecological information about pollution also opened. But we were struggling because of that. We made a huge advocacy campaign. Sometimes we have disappointed. I believe Nadia will support me that sometimes we feel that governors didn't hear us, like why we should keep going, why we should open this information. But recently we found out that a lot of Russian networks try to make new businesses in Ukraine, in Lithuania, Estonia. So that's why they want to capture business, and they want to capture attention of civil society organizations. So that's why they make their network, their spy network. And I'm not telling this because like I'm agent of 007 or it's some movie or it's something unreal. Guys, we are living in this world just right now. So that's why transparency, accountability and reliable information now it's more vital and more important than ever. So I encourage all of you to use reliable data, to use different platforms, to check your current counterparties, to check your politicians, to check with whom they're working with, and also please make monitoring of your existing partners or your clients or those with whom are you working with, because it might be dangerous or disappointed for you that now this company under sanctions, or they might pretend that they are Russian spies. Thank you, Lina.
Okay, thank you so much. Great set of arguments that actually security is not helped. I mean, we should ask ourselves, what country has the capacity? I mean, government sets itself for failure if it presumes that it can really cover everything. I mean, even countries which invest disproportionately in secret service, such as mine, who pays more for secret service salaries than education, there is never going to be enough resources for people to read all this information. You need to rely on the society, as Nataliia just said, on companies which need to check themselves with whom they do business because it's in their interest. Okay, you could not pay also many government agents to check all this. So that is another strong argument. So I see, of course, that a good set of arguments are coming, but whom are we going to take these arguments to? Okay, here is really the question. What we do in the T-Index, we didn't do it from the first time. We're now at the 4th edition, that we started to write to governments. We identified in every government someone who is in charge of freedom of information, and we sent them the scores when they're finally ready. Our scores are transparent on the website. You can get directly to the website, so they're not really like ratings, you know, like in doing business. And we send them. Because things can happen, we can get things wrong. Maybe they change website. Maybe we downgrade them. So we write to them, say, here is the information about you. You're going to be published alongside other 139 countries on this benchmarking website on transparency. Get back to us. Tell us if you agree, disagree, and whatever. And the response from the 140 countries is that we heard back from about a third, which are mostly Latin American countries and a few European governments and a couple of African countries. Otherwise, it's, you know, dead silence. In Asia, we didn't manage to get anyone to move on freedom of information. But in Europe also, there's a surprisingly number of countries. It's also true that they're doing well. So they don't think that they should contest this and do anything. But there are a number of governments which engage. which engage and which say, okay, we don't like this rating. What can we do better? I mean, why do you think this is wrong? So I think that one approach would be to actually petition every country with an explanation and why this decision on money laundering should not be interpreted against transparency. I mean, that would be an obvious thing to do, to just write to everybody this way. The OECD forum that I mentioned is another forum. But what about European Union? I mean, who is the information czar at the European Union, to whom we should write? You know, putting the Kissinger famous question, whom should we call in Brussels? Who is in charge of transparency to provide the coordination needed for this effort? Because if government coordinates, collective action problems get solved. If not, we have to solve them themselves. I mean, I really think we should take advantage of this meeting and put out a warning that actually this kind of rulings are badly interpreted, that this security climate is badly interpreted, and people do not really understand, because we should not presume that, we should start from the presumption of innocence. They don't realize what they're doing. They don't realize what they're losing when they make this. At least this is, I think, how we should approach it. So, could we put together an argument? Whom should we petition? I'd like to start with OGP, because it is actually their business to do this. They can be the main help in this.
Thank you, Alina. I can also add to the OECD's upcoming event on integrity. There will be also the UK's Counter Illicit Finance Summit in the 2026 sometime. So I think this is the topic where we can also take it all up and discuss with different governments. And as you rightly said, Open Government Partnership is the platform where different branches of government come together, or different ministries come together, different agencies come together, and they can discuss the issues like the beneficial ownership transparency. And in many countries, it's not only one agency or the Freedom of Information Officer who is responsible for this whole system. Of course, it's usually network, if you can say so, but several agencies that should take the decision in order for it to come forward. And OGP is a great platform, because how it operates in all the countries, there is so-called MSF, Multi-Stakeholder Forum, which gathers together, which has several civil society organizations as partners, but also government agencies, different ones, who sit together at one table, and they discuss these commitments that then become the part of the action plans. So we have seen again how it worked in Ukraine, how some agencies or ministries were telling this is not on us, this is on someone else. But when actually, as part of OGP meetings, they come and sit together, they can discuss, and civil society can push that it is basically decided who should take this forward. Also, when the commitments as part of the Open Government Action Plans are formed, it's not one agency who is, or one ministry who is responsible for implementing them. We have the partners involved, so different agencies who should contribute to the implementation of commitment. They are also taking this responsibility upon them, and usually once in a quarter, or it depends on the country, on their custom, they sit together and they discuss the progress, and civil society can monitor and can push for the result. And also, as I mentioned before, we have the independent reporting mechanism that assesses the commitments, where after the action plan finishes, the government could see how they progressed during the at this agenda. We also, for the peer learning among the governments, right now we have the Africa BO network, but I think it's also time to push again. We had some start, but it did not go forward as of now. It's not a living mechanism, but we could push with the OGP countries to have the BO networks, where the governments who are open, or those who have already the commitments, and there are many of them in the OGP action plans, they can talk and see how it's done in different countries. The civil society can emphasize the best examples of the advancement of the BO commitments, not only on transparency, but also on verification, interoperability, on having the data available for public procurement. And also, I think this discussion, we did not mention the local governments that much, but again, if we take the example of Ukraine, there is a lot of reconstruction of the infrastructure is made, and then the local governments also contract the businesses, and it's essential to see who the real owners are for the government contracts, but also on the local level, as in many of our countries, it's actually the local governments who deal with it, who might not have the access to the data that is even held on the national level. I think what our message should be that opacity creates security blind spots. So we should all push that it's not the openness versus security. It's when there is closeness and opacity, actually more security issues arise there. And Nataliia very well said in which matters, but it's for the companies themselves, it's for the procurement agencies, it's for anti-money laundering, because there is not enough data to be verifiable. It's for trust also, as citizens, when citizens, governments, companies work together, and this OGP tries to have it when the reform is formed together, and they see that citizens can monitor and can access how the reform is done. Of course, there is much more legitimacy to it. There is much more support, and could be gained with this. But if the government claim that they have the verification or so on, but the citizens cannot, or civil society investigators cannot see how the system works, how the verification or the sanctions work, the trust might not be there, that it's really working. And again, Ukraine is an example where the war is ongoing, and several other countries, as in recent months, unfortunately, we have seen, are also in the war. I think it's time for the other EU countries to take this example and to evaluate the risks, the security risks of closed data in Ukraine, and also what has been opened. And as now there is not such a big, intense security issues, there are no active wars. It's the time when the information can be analyzed and the access could be analyzed, but also putting the public interest first, and only then looking at what should be closed because there is real security risk. So I think it's time again to look and to analyze how the closeness may work against the governments, and having the influences of Russian government or other governments that having the big influences they had in Ukraine when something was not seen. We could analyze this now in order to have the public access, to allow the investigators to use the information before it already is the real threat in terms of the security for other countries. Again, as the OGP, those countries that are members, it's a very good vehicle, and for all those civil society who are here, I suggest that you come to the table there, suggest this reopening the registries if they were closed, or advancement of what has been there, but talk to different agencies and show how the closeness is a threat, not vice versa. And on the international level, of course, let's work with our governments and civil society to build a network where they can do the peer learning, and also learn at the countries that already passed forward or had this real security issues, and who already fought some of that, but also how preventatively the EU countries could analyze the the data, the openness, and to preventatively set the rules, the norms that would not be needed if something unexpected happens, as it was in Ukraine.
Thank you so much. I'll go to Friedrich now to ask for questions, but I also see that we do have another set of people here who could be actually speakers. So I'd like to open up in this last 12 minutes where we have suggestions. Please use the chat for suggestions, but please also raise your hands. And if we have a minute, I see, for instance, Professor Brigitte Unger, who's an authority on money laundering in the academic world. So Friedrich and then Brigitte. And let's not, let's aim for something very concrete. In my opinion, if a European Union spokesperson without any regulation would say something that we are in favor of, and this should be interpreted in this way, and please don't close any more that, I think that this would help, in my opinion. So if we convince people to give the signals without, big activity, I think it would help, because it's also some sort of, diffusion. Countries just follow on another. It's easier for them to shut down than they're afraid of lawsuits and I don't know, whatever. So Friedrich, please, and then Brigitte.
I have maybe a small proposal, which is, I think we, in this entire discussion about beneficial ownership, we kind of never clarified that this is meant to be a fundamental part of the contract of having a company. I own a company. That means I get benefits, I get entitled to its dividends, I am protected from liability, all these aspects, right? That needs to be a treaty that has two sides, right? And the other side to that is you need to report to the public. You need to report your financial statements, but also you need to report on that ownership. And I think that fundamental clarity that like a limited liability company is a public artifact and it has certain duties to the public that we kind of missed out on. And I feel the European Union right now is actually going through that exercise. There is this attempt at creating a EU Inc., right? A new regime around incorporation in the European Union that's native to the EU. And I wonder whether that could be a place where we engage and say, hey, if you're trying to define what a company looks like in the future, and that's implicitly going to become the model for all companies in member states, why not make that part of its DNA, part of the fundamental contract of the thing?
Yeah, great. Although my concern is actually on real ownership, on general ownership, not just on beneficial ownership. Countries are starting to restrict that one too. Professor Unger, please.
I see that my students at Utrecht University always struggles with what you called, Friedrich and others, unstructured data. So investigative journalists, YouControl have a lot of data, but they are unstructured. And to structure this data, it would take years, which my students clearly would not devote. Their PhD time would be over. So we always refer again to public procurement data because they are nicely structured. And my question is, wouldn't there be a way that we could develop to really start collecting data so that they're in a structured way, like a big matrix where we fill in all this information? I'm not a technical person, but I just see that this unstructured data prevent a lot of research because you simply cannot use them except if you follow one step after the other by handwork, as journalists and YouControl do. But we would, if we could, so to speak, make this a big data set, which can be used for big data analysis, we would have a very big step ahead of discovering corruption.
Yes, absolutely. We do this in public procurement, but we convince very few countries. So Ukraine's Prozoro, for instance, has risk indicators built into the system because it was built on top of European actually research projects and the single market public procurement scoreboard, which already have some indicators. And there are a couple of other countries which have this, but most of them don't. Most of them don't. So it is a big effort to structure. And if the information is not there, it's complicated. But we had a research project which resulted in opentender.eu, where we try to do this for public procurement. We scrap millions of tenders which are described in a systematic form with corruption risk indicators on them, like the number of bidders, competition indicators, transparency indicators, and the rest. And of course, we would need the same with companies. But before structuring information, we are now facing the problem that we have less and less data to structure it ourselves, because more or less, I mean, we try to do that. Any final proposals on what to do? Are participants to this conversation willing to send a short, commonly signed awareness document, which I don't think should be longer than 1 page, making these arguments to spread around the OECD community next week, for instance? Would this help? On top of the excellent OGP really action plan, but that has been around for a while, and I think that we need to give more signals, and I think one is to EU, and again, to whom? In the EU, that's a question which is unanswered, I think, among us. Who exactly in the EU should get this, and the disadvantages to security and to business? I mean, think of Mario Draghi's competitiveness recommendations. Definitely restricting company ownership information is totally against the recommendations of the Draghi report, which is all based on reducing transaction costs in Europe. Any final proposal and words? We have time for at least 3 participants to be briefly, or for all of them, if you keep it to 1 minute.
I wanted to add something, especially what Professor Birgit said right now. So we understand that transparency is in a very tough spot, and for everybody on this call, it's like a long existing question we all want to solve from different angles. Us more on the OCCRP side for investigative journalists, and then there's TI and others. But what we do know, there is data out there. So how do we use the data that already exists so it can kind of be beneficial for all of us? So I think one of the results for that is to kind of collaborate. That's number one thing. And to use the data which we currently have to see certain patterns that maybe I, as an investigative journalist, comparison to somebody coming from academia, do not see it in the same light. And we can kind of contribute to one another. One thing that OCCRP has been working on very strongly, it's something called the Illicit Finance Data Lab, which we basically created a collaborative initiative where we're mixing an opening floor for investigative journalists and academic researchers to get different insights to existing public data which we have, because something that the journalist did not actually see could be actually seen and visible through an academic researcher's eyes, because their approach to data is a bit different from how we are approaching to data. So this is one way how we're trying to kind of tackle that lack of transparency, but actually growing and finding new things in the data which already exist. So I think this could kind of lead to good collaborations if this is one of the objectives of how we're approaching this problem with transparency. Thank you.
Thanks, Amra. Happy to volunteer. My 50 students, I teach a corruption class, popular every year, and some of them are quite data savvy. So we tell everybody, that we consider these organizations as clients, and we as researchers who work for free out of enthusiasm. So when you have research questions that you don't have time to address, please send them to us, and we'll build a capstone around them and put people research doing exactly this, data mining, these other things that we like to do. But in the short term, in the next months, is there anything that we can do to signal strongly to get more coverage to our whistleblowing on the fact that areas which used to be accessible are shrinking in front of our eyes? Any suggestions? Maike.
Is that me? Sorry. Were you calling someone else? Or were you calling me, Elena?
No, I was calling Maike, but if you got the floor, please go ahead and make your suggestions.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the UK is about to host a summit, an illicit finance summit, and property, real estate is going to be one of the topics under consideration and discussion. And I think maybe that's a lens that is more attractive to current governments, to think about beneficial ownership data through the lens of looking at specific assets. And it has implications for some of our work. And a lot of the people who are here, their countries will be represented at the summit. So I think kind of starting to gear up towards that summit and thinking about the type of commitments at a domestic and an international level that we'd like to see them is something that we can kind of act upon. And I'm sure that it will be discussed at the OECD next week.
Great, that's another venue, but I'm still a believer in collective action. I think that, of course, every one of you should do things separately, but I also think that a joint warning signed by everybody actually might be good at this stage. But maybe I'm wrong. Maike, please.
Yeah, so basically, we are also happy to do something jointly. So actually, what we do for North Data, of course, we are approaching the different countries, and we are in contact, and in heavy contact. We can be very persistent with different countries, and of course, we are trying to get access. So basically, what we do at North Data is, what I already mentioned. So if you are a journalist, you get access for free at North Data. So just drop us an email, info@northdata.de, and then we are happy to help. And you see already a lot of data in front of the paywall without paying for it.
Thanks a lot. So that is definitely a contribution. I'd like to give the final word to my YouControl colleagues who actually organized this call and got this great collection of speakers together, and whom I would fully support if they try to do something by OECD time. Again, my opinion is that we're already together. It's really nothing to write half a page and distribute it next week. So I will really, you have my support in doing this, and I have the floor. We have 3 speakers in different plenaries, so I think we can all put it up. So last word to you, Nataliia,
yes,
since you are in the toughest spot, and please tell us what to do.
Thank you so much, Alina. I want to support your idea to prepare a very good one-page information like policy brief, why information should be open, to sign. All of us may sign on this official appeal, and also if we have possibility to share it during OECD, OGP platform, Transparency International, I think it will be benefit. It's not the final stage. Also, I propose to create a special group like advocacy group who would decide to join to open information, to work with European politics, to work with local politics. Maybe in Germany, for example, you decided to make this campaign. I know Lithuania also struggling because their government decided to close information about beneficial ownership. So maybe, Anastasiya, if you could have leadership in this position, we are ready to join. We are ready to prepare some arguments, some information, some investigation, etc., what's needed. And also I want to tell you, dear colleagues, so in Ukraine, we have experienced both. We have open data and closed data, and in the most critical conditions. And the lesson is very clear. Transparency, it's not risk. It's part of national security. When data is open, so thousands, even millions, in experience of Ukraine, millions of people, businesses, journalists, analytics, help detect risks, expose corruption, identify hidden influence. So when data is closed, this system disappears. So that's why, according to Ukrainian experience, data matters and money talks. And we can uncover this these frauds. We can uncover this if we can join together. All of you have a brilliant social capital. All of you, I believe, can change the system. So let's agree together that this today's meeting was the start of our huge advocacy campaign in regards of transparency, accountability, and let's push, reopen the information.
Great. So let's try to do that. Actually, moving to facts. I mean, speaking as an academic, thanks a lot to all of you who are in the forefront of the battle for transparency, and you will hear from us. We will really try to start awareness. I think simply the monitoring of countries which started to close, putting this list together in real time, people are not aware of the phenomenon. I mean, everybody just acts individually. I think that this will raise awareness and might help us. Thanks a lot. And we're looking forward to the next Anti-Corruption in Progress a month from now on, which for the journalists here is on a rather special topic, which is media capture. We have a group in BridgeGap which actually studies media capture, and you are definitely welcome to attend that. New data, and we'll provide a European map of media capture. Thanks a lot. Until next time, and actually earlier at OECD next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Bye.